An ordinary grocery trip turns into an unforgettable showdown when a middle-aged man tells a black woman to go back to Africa. What she says next doesn't just silence the room, it leaves the entire crowd speechless. The supermarket buzzed with the usual noise of carts rolling and shoppers murmuring. It was a quiet afternoon in the small town of Clarksville, Ohio. Rows of bright produce gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and soft background music hummed from the speakers. In the dairy aisle, a black woman named Vanessa Jackson browsed calmly, examining cartons of milk. Vanessa was in her mid-30s, dressed casually in a crisp white blouse and blue jeans. Her natural curls framed her face, and a reusable shopping bag hung from her arm. She was the kind of woman who carried herself with quiet confidence and grace, a calm presence. But little did Vanessa know that her ordinary shopping trip was about to take an ugly turn. As Vanessa pushed her cart toward the produce section, she noticed a man standing near the apples. He was tall, in his early 50s, with sharp features and a baseball cap that barely covered his receding hairline. His name was Hank Thompson, and he was a long-time local with a reputation for speaking his mind, even when he shouldn't. Hank's brow furrowed as he caught sight of Vanessa, his eyes lingering on her longer than necessary. She ignored him at first, but his stare felt heavier with every passing second. Vanessa paused to pick up a bag of oranges when she heard him mutter, "People like you don't belong here." Her hand froze mid-air, but she remained calm, refusing to give him a reaction. She took a deep breath, grabbed the oranges, and turned to leave. But Hank wasn't finished. "Why don't you go back to Africa?" he said, louder this time. The words echoed through the aisle, sharp and biting. The hum of conversation and music seemed to stop all at once. Shoppers nearby froze, their heads snapping toward the source of the commotion. A mother clutched her child's hand and moved toward another aisle. A teenage boy near the bananas turned to stare, his expression stunned. Vanessa's body stiffened, but her face remained calm. She turned slowly to face Hank. The man stood tall, arms crossed, with a smug expression on his face as if daring her to respond. The room held its breath. Vanessa looked at Hank, her gaze unwavering. She felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Her mind raced with possibilities. She could lash out, yell, and tell him exactly how wrong he was. She could walk away, pretend she didn't hear. But neither of those options felt right. Instead, she straightened her posture, exhaled slowly, and smiled, a calm, disarming smile that seemed to throw Hank off balance. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady and composed. "What did you just say?" Hank's face reddened, but he didn't back down. He looked around as if seeking approval from the crowd. "I said," he repeated loudly, "why don't you go back to Africa? You don't belong here, lady." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some shoppers exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others stood frozen, unsure of what to do. One employee near the potatoes hesitated, looking like he wanted to intervene but didn't know how. Vanessa's expression didn't falter. She stepped closer, closing the space between them, her voice calm but firm. "Let's talk about that," she said. "Since you brought it up." The crowd had grown larger now, circling the produce section like a silent audience. Some people craned their necks to see. Others whispered to one another. Vanessa's voice carried, clear and measured. "You think I don't belong here? You think this isn't my home?" Hank opened his mouth to respond, but she didn't let him. "Do you even know where you are?" "Where we are?" she asked, her tone sharp yet calm. "This town. This country. The very ground you're standing on. Let's talk about that." The crowd leaned in. Even the store's intercom music seemed to have faded into silence. Vanessa's voice carried the strength of generations. "My ancestors were brought here in chains. Kidnapped from their homeland. Forced to build this country brick by brick, sweat by sweat, while being treated like animals." Hank's smirk faltered. "My great-grandparents worked these lands for nothing. My grandfather fought in wars for this country, only to come back and face signs that said, 'Whites only.' Yet we stayed. We endured. We built lives. We raised families. We fought for the very freedom you enjoy." The crowd was rapt. The weight of Vanessa's words hung in the air like heavy fog. Hank's face turned red, and he shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. Vanessa continued. So tell me, sir, who doesn't belong here? Because it sure isn't me. A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Someone near the back clapped softly. Others nodded, whispering to their neighbors. Hank opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked around, realizing that no one was backing him up. Vanessa took a step back, her voice softer now, yet no less powerful. I didn't come here to argue with you, she said. I came to buy groceries. Just like you. But maybe instead of tearing each other down, we should learn to be better. To do better. The crowd shifted, many people now looking at Hank with disapproval. A teenage girl near the apples spoke up, her voice cutting through the silence. She's right, the girl said. You should be ashamed. A ripple of agreement spread through the room. Hank's face turned pale. Hank grumbled something under his breath and grabbed his cart. Without looking back, he turned and wheeled it toward the exit. The crowd parted for him, their silent judgment louder than any words. Vanessa watched him leave, a quiet strength still in her expression. One shopper approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Thank you for saying what needed to be said, the woman whispered. Vanessa smiled faintly, gripping her cart once more. Sometimes the truth just has to be spoken. And with that, she turned back to her shopping. The crowd didn't disperse immediately. People lingered, murmuring to one another as if processing what they had just witnessed. A middle-aged man in a plaid shirt approached Vanessa cautiously, pushing his cart alongside hers. Miss, he said, clearing his throat awkwardly. What you said back there, you were right. My father used to say things like that. I guess I never really thought about it before. Vanessa looked at him, her expression kind but steady. It's never too late to think about it now, she replied. He nodded, a little embarrassed but grateful. You've given me something to think about today. As Vanessa moved down the next aisle, other shoppers quietly approached her, offering words of support. One elderly woman, her hands trembling slightly, said, I was born in a different time. That doesn't make it an excuse. I'm sorry for people like him. Vanessa squeezed her hand gently. Thank you. The past can't be changed, but we can all do better today. Near the end of the aisle, a young employee wearing the store's signature green apron approached Vanessa timidly. His name tag read Jordan, and he looked no older than 19. He'd been stacking produce when the incident occurred, frozen mid-motion as Hank's words echoed through the store. Ma'am, Jordan said softly, his voice uncertain, I just wanted to say, what you did back there was amazing. I didn't know what to do, but you were so calm, so strong. Vanessa smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Jordan. Sometimes silence lets the wrong voices win. Speaking up doesn't always mean shouting. It's about standing firm in the truth. Jordan nodded, his eyes thoughtful as if something Vanessa said struck deeper. You're right, he said. I've been afraid to call out stuff like that. But maybe I don't have to be anymore. Vanessa squeezed his shoulder gently. One voice can start a ripple. You're stronger than you think, Jordan. Vanessa turned into the snacks aisle and paused. A mother who'd earlier pulled her young son away from the commotion now stood waiting for her. She was petite, with dark curls and tired eyes, her little boy peeking curiously from behind her legs. I want to say thank you, the mother said, her voice cracking slightly. My son heard what that man said. I didn't know how to explain it to him. Vanessa's heart softened as she crouched down to the little boy's level. Hi there, she said gently. Do you like superheroes? The boy nodded shyly. Well, you know, sometimes heroes don't wear capes, Vanessa said with a warm smile. They just stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. You can be a hero, too, by being kind to others. The boy's face brightened, and his mother blinked back tears. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me the right words to say to him. Vanessa rose, her heart full. Kindness starts with moments like these, she replied softly. Hold on to them. Elsewhere in the store, customers who'd witnessed the encounter had already begun sharing it. A middle-aged man in a baseball cap stood by the checkout lanes, recounting the event to a cashier. "I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like it," he said, shaking his head. She didn't even yell. She just spoke the truth, and that man didn't have a single thing to say back. The cashier, a young woman with blue-dyed hair, listened with rapt attention. "Wow. I wish I could have seen that. People need to hear stuff like that more often." "You can bet they will," the man replied, pulling out his phone. "Somebody was recording it, I'm sure. That's the kind of moment that gets people talking." What the man said wasn't wrong. In the far corner of the store, a teenage girl named Mia had been holding her phone discreetly throughout the encounter. She'd uploaded the video online within minutes, captioning it, "Woman responds to racism with pure class. Watch this." By the time Vanessa reached the checkout lane, the video already had dozens of shares. People were commenting, liking, and tagging friends. Vanessa approached the checkout line, her cart filled. As she unloaded her groceries onto the conveyor belt, she noticed how quiet the store had become. The cashier smiled at her, scanning her items slowly. "You handled that better than I ever could," she said softly. It takes guts to speak up like that." Vanessa returned the smile. "Sometimes all it takes is remembering who you are. You can't let people's words steal your dignity." The cashier nodded, her admiration evident. "You're an inspiration." Vanessa handed over her payment, thanking the cashier before pushing her cart toward the exit. As she moved, she felt dozens of eyes on her, not in judgment, but in respect. The sun was beginning to dip as Vanessa reached her car. As she unloaded her groceries, she spotted a familiar figure a few parking spaces away. It was Hank. He sat in his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His face, which had been red with anger earlier, now looked pale and conflicted. Vanessa hesitated for a moment before deciding against approaching him. Change, she knew, wouldn't happen overnight. Instead, she got into her car and started the engine, leaving Hank alone with his thoughts. By the time Vanessa reached home and unpacked her groceries, her phone buzzed incessantly. Messages flooded in from friends and family. "Have you seen this video? Is this you?" Vanessa opened the link, her breath catching. The video of her encounter had spread like wildfire, now with thousands of views. The comments poured in. "This woman's grace and strength, wow. She shut that man down without raising her voice. Incredible. We need more people like her in this world." Vanessa stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. She hadn't done it for attention, she'd simply spoken the truth. But now the truth was reaching far beyond the walls of that grocery store. As Vanessa sat on her living room couch, processing the whirlwind of the day, her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then picked up. "Hello." A deep male voice responded. "Ms. Jackson? This is David Mitchell. I'm a journalist from the local news. I saw the video of what happened today, and I'd love to speak with you. Your words, they're making an impact. People need to hear more of them." Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. I didn't expect any of this," she admitted. David chuckled softly. "The best moments are the ones we don't plan for. Would you be willing to share your story?" Vanessa paused, thinking of the people in the grocery store, the mother, the young employee, the murmurs of change. Maybe this was bigger than her. "Yes," she said finally. "I'd be happy to share." And just like that, what started as an ordinary day began to ripple outward in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The days following the encounter were a whirlwind. The video continued to spread, reaching millions across the country. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting Vanessa's calm and dignified response to hatred. People of all backgrounds shared it, saying how her words had inspired them to speak up, to confront prejudice with truth and grace. Vanessa found herself on local news segments, radio interviews, and even invited to speak at a nearby community event. She hadn't sought the spotlight, but it found her nonetheless. On a cool Saturday afternoon, Vanessa stood on the stage of the Clarksville Community Center, looking out over a room filled with hundreds of faces. Some were familiar, others strangers, but they were all there for one reason: to listen. Vanessa took a breath, the microphone cool in her hand. "When that man told me I didn't belong here," she began, her voice steady, "it hurt. Not because I believed him, but because I know how many others have been made to feel that way. How many people are silenced by words meant to diminish their worth?" The room was silent, every eye on her. "But here's what I want to say to all of you today. Words can harm, but they can also heal. We cannot fight ignorance with more anger. We fight it with truth, with kindness, and with the courage to speak up when we see wrong." She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "This country, this world, belongs to all of us. Every person, no matter their skin color, background, or story, has a place here. Our strength is in our diversity, and our future depends on how we choose to treat one another." Applause began to build, first soft, then thunderous. As Vanessa stepped down from the stage, a man lingered in the back of the room, almost blending into the shadows. He wore a worn baseball cap and clutched it tightly in his hands. It was Hank. Vanessa spotted him almost immediately, her heart skipping a beat. She didn't approach him, she let him come to her. Slowly, he walked forward, his steps heavy with hesitation. When he stood in front of her, his eyes were different. They no longer carried anger but something else, regret. I didn't come here to cause trouble," he mumbled, his voice rough. "I came to listen." Vanessa nodded, her expression soft yet unwavering. "And did you hear what you needed to?" Hank swallowed hard, his face turning red as he looked down at the cap in his hands. "I don't have the right words to say I'm sorry, but I am. I've got a lot to think about." "Change starts with realizing there's a problem," Vanessa said gently. "It's never too late to be better." Hank nodded, then turned and walked out, his shoulders heavy but his pace slower, less hurried than before. Later that evening, as Vanessa sat on her porch sipping tea, her phone buzzed with another message. It was from Jordan, the young store employee. "You were right. One voice can start a ripple. Thank you." Vanessa smiled as she put her phone down. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. She knew the world wasn't perfect. People like Hank would always exist, and there would always be moments when ignorance reared its ugly head. But she also knew that truth, spoken with courage, could pierce even the hardest of hearts. Sometimes, all it took was one voice to remind others of the power they had to make things better. And so, with the quiet strength she'd always carried, Vanessa leaned back and watched the first stars appear in the evening sky, a symbol of light breaking through darkness.